and welcome to this edition of Talk Vietnam. 50 years ago, the 17th Parallel, The People's War, a documentary by world-renowned Dutch filmmaker Joris Evens, was premiered in Europe. The film helped the international community to better understand about what was happening in Vietnam during the fiercest days of the war. With a total of 4 documentaries made about Vietnam during the period from 1964 to 1970, Joris Evens told the world what he recalled later as, quote, "One should be aware that the biggest colonial war mankind has ever seen is being fought in Vietnam." Now, his films fueled the anti-war movement, helping to end the war in Vietnam. Today, we're joined by our guests. We're very honored to have Andre Stupkins, the former director as well as the current senior advisor of the European Foundation Joris Evens, a leading expert on Joris Evens in going back in time to learn more about how Joris Evens had devoted himself to Vietnam and how his love was for the country. Hello, Andre. Thank you very much for joining us. If I may start, how did you get, an interest in researching particularly about Joris Evens?
When I was a student, the anti-war movement in the Western countries, in Western Europe, and I'm from the Netherlands, and got a booming, explosive moment at that time. A lot of demonstrations to support the Vietnamese in their struggle against the Americans. So a lot of students got involved in this students' movement, and for us also at that time, although Joris Evens was working for decades abroad, was a hero. For me, he was a hero. So when there was a demonstration to support the Vietnamese, he was at the head of this demonstration, and I went there, and it was very special to have a revolutionary filmmaker in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands has a very long tradition of famous artists, painters like Rembrandt, Vermeer, Van Gogh and others. And these are very good, authentic artists. And Joris Evens is a similar authentic artist. And he had a global scope. He went abroad, not stay at home, but went abroad. On all continents he made his films. And he was very much committed to this revolutionary movement in all these continents.
Yes. For many of our audience who might not know much about who Joris Evens was, can you please give a brief introduction about whom you call Holland's legendary filmmaker?
He started filmmaking and he became one of the pioneers of documentary film. In fact, he wanted to elevate film, but at that time silent, black and white. He wanted to elevate it to an art form. He was one of the pioneers of the first generation, and now we already have a 4th and a 5th generation. But there was a documentary filmmaker in the Netherlands who said, in fact, every documentary filmmaker, at least in the Netherlands, is a follower, a successor of Joris Evens, but almost all Dutch filmmakers go abroad. Yes. But also the way of treating a handheld camera. He was one of the creators of this way of making films, to come closer to people, not in a static way on a tripod, but with a camera, come close. Yes. To get an emotional involvement of the audience with this subject.
What initially brought Evens to Vietnam?
In fact, he got acquainted with Vietnamese filmmakers in the 50s, and they met Joris in the Moscow Film Festival, they met Joris in the Leipzig Documentary Film Festival, and they invited Joris to come to Vietnam because they said, here is an anti-colonial war happening. And he made an important film, the first solidarity film to support the independence of Indonesia, and they knew. But it took several years before Joris could go to Vietnam. Yes. And then in 1964 he finally agreed with this invitation and went to Vietnam. Yes. And the year after, in June 1965, he spoke with President Ho Chi Minh, and he asked him to make this documentary, Le Ciel la Terre, it's heaven and earth.
J'ai connu Madrid pendant la guerre d'Espagne et la Havane dans la fièvre révolutionnaire. J'ai connu beaucoup d'autres villes où le peuple se préparait à combattre. Aucune n'était aussi tranquille que Hanoï ce matin, le 14 juin 1965. Le calme de Hanoï, c'est sa première victoire. La capitale du Nord vit sur les menaces perpétuelles du bombardement américain. Mais il n'a pas de panique. Les gens protègent leur ville, ils la dissimulent, ils l'enterrent.
Can you share with us a little bit about the context of history during which he made these films? As we said in the beginning, it was some of the fiercest days of war in Vietnam, the 1960s.
Yeah. He noticed, of course, how fierce the situation was, but he also knew that it was very difficult for the Vietnamese to tell this story to the world, because of course the Western and American parties, this side, didn't want to show what was really happening. So when he arrived in 1965, he said he urgently had to make a wake-up call for the world. They have to show the world immediately a kind of poster-like film now to show the world what was happening. So he made it quite fast. Heaven and Earth, it's about the people in Vietnam fighting for independence, reunification on the earth, and they experience the threats, the air raids for the American Air Force. So this contrast, this contradictions between what is happening above and what the peasants experience. And along this film you see also a kind of road trip, a kind of traveling book. So Joris himself is traveling on the countryside of Vietnam. You see him, you hear his voice over. He makes it personal. He experienced this before, the same awful situation, people waiting, the bombs dropping on the city. And then he has this voice over the column of this population. It's their first victory. Le Chien la Terre, it played an important role in this anti-war movement in Western countries. But afterwards, he said he wasn't satisfied with this poster-like, pamphlet-like film. He wanted to get involved in the People War in itself, to dig deeper and to show daily life. So then it was he made the 17th Parallel, which is a completely different film.
How was the second movie, as you said, completely different from the first?
He wanted to show what really meant to be involved in a people's war with a people's army, because nobody understands. It's difficult, at least for a Western public and the United States, to understand how it is living in the countryside, what is the life, the daily life of peasants, but then an extra, what is living not under the bombs, but with bombs. So many air raids in daily life, how you survive, how you can get food, how do you get babies, how you nurse babies, how you nurse people in the hospital, how you create dances, how you train music, how you educate people in schools, when every time you must be aware of the dropping of the bombs. So it's a very slow film. You see the serenity of the life, the daily life of peasants, and you very much get involved of the protagonists, two women, the leaders of this village, the Vinh Linh community, and they explain how they organize daily life underground. So it's a completely other world, unknown to the audience, and it's so impressive because it's very authentic, it's genuine, that you, after the premiere, the audience was completely silent. They never experienced this world on screen.
Exactly.
And people noticed what it meant to be involved in the People's War, where the people, where the peasants fight for their country, their independence.
Dans sa maison, il y a 3 abris. Un pour y cuisiner. Un pour y dormir. Et le 3e contre les bombardements des B-52. Toutes les maisons du village sont faites de cette façon. Juan n'a pas fini de creuser son camp-abri avec sa femme et leur fille. Cela fait 6 fois qu'ils sont bombardés. 6 fois qu'ils déménagent, 6 fois qu'ils creusent de nouveaux abris. Thì lên con mau vào ăn cơm cái đói bụng.
For you, when you first saw these films, Heaven and Earth, and then the second film about the Vietnam War, but from completely different perspective of Joris Evens, what struck you the most?
It's unknown to us, but it's also the sincerity and the calm of the people. There's a wonderful sequence of women who are combing their hair. It's just a daily life situation. But you hear the noise of these airplanes of the American Air Force, so they should be shocked, they should be in panic, they should be afraid, but they weren't. They're just combing their hair and they're gossiping about, like we're doing. So it was their the strength and the calm of these people, their confidence that they will win, that there was no way that the Americans could win. That made it very impressive. There's also a young guy, Duck, who explains how clever he saw and noticed the size of an airfield of the Americans, so he could tell. he was a kind of spy. He went from North Vietnam, he crossed the river, the Ben Hai River, to the south. He could tell the soldiers in the north what the Americans did with this airfield, with this airport. And the North Vietnamese completely destroyed thanks to this information of this 9-year young guy.
Yes, wow.
So these were the sequences that impressed us.
I'm very interested in the process in which he made these films. Obviously, he made several trips to produce the 4 films that he did. How was the process of filmmaking, kind of behind the scene, if he ever shared with you?
You must know that Joris suffered from asthma. So the second time he was in Hanoi in February 1967, he had to stay in bed because he suffered from this asthma. It was too cold, and so his wife at that time, Marceline Loredan Evans, she made the footage for the Bertrand Russell Tribunal. So they made footage around Hanoi. But then they decided, after they got permission of Ho Chi Minh, to enter the war front at Vinh Linh. It's the 70th parallel. And of course, this was quite tricky. It's in the line of fire.
Yes.
So it took many days to go from Hanoi to Vinh Linh, only driving by night. And the first night they were attacked. Wow. And one of the camera was wounded in his neck, and Marceline had to go to a hospital, etc. So they had to suffer from a lot of sacrifices to do this.
Yes, they were basically...
And underground with asthma, it's not the best way to... Yeah. So they lose a lot of kilos, but they, of course, wanted these sacrifices to show the world what was really happening.
He was there along with his wife and another cameraman, was that right?
He was also very clever in finding very good quality colleagues in Vietnam. This was another aspect of his production. He always used local people, local cameramen, local filmmakers. Wow. And there were 2 cameramen, one from the documentary film studio and one of the feature film studio.
And they were both Vietnamese.
And of course they were all Vietnamese.
Was he ever put in a threatening situation where his life was put on the line? Because obviously, you know, documenting the war, it's not an easy job. It's very dangerous.
Of course, I told you that they were bombed during night and they had to flee in a crater, and they found out there were all kind of animals in this crater, and of course, and Marceline had to go to the hospital, but he insisted. And Ho Chi Minh at first refused that his wife Marceline went to Vinh Linh, but then she showed the number of the concentration camp, and nothing can be worse than Auschwitz-Birkenau. And then she told him this story that she survived Auschwitz-Birkenau, the concentration camp, and Ho Chi Minh said, when you did this, you can also manage to go to Vinh Linh. So they went together and they stayed there for 5 weeks underground and lived the lives of the community of Vinh Linh. You have to understand that Joris was already 68 when he went underground for 5 weeks. He was 68 at that time.
Besides cameramen and soldiers, Joris Evans was also joined by many other special friends during his journey in Vietnam. Among those was Nguyễn Thị Xuân Phượng. She was Joris Evans' translator during his time in Vietnam from 1964 to 1969. To join Joris Evans and his wife to film on the fiercest battlefield of Vĩnh Linh. Over 50 years have passed, but Phượng still remembers clearly the day she first met this filmmaking couple.
Khi chúng tôi bước vào phòng thì thấy 2 người. Một là một cái vị tóc bạc trắng bồng bềnh. Cái thứ hai là một người đàn bà tóc hung. Thì bác Hồ mới quay lại nói rằng là đây là 2 nhà điện ảnh thế giới cách mạng, Joris Evans mà cái thứ hai là Marceline Loredan, và họ sang đây để mà làm một công việc rất quan trọng là quay phim về cuộc kháng chiến của chúng ta.
And Phượng, a doctor at a time, also acted as special assistant for Joris Evans on his way to the major battlefield of Vĩnh Linh, a DMZ zone in the central region of Vietnam, where people frequently faced with bombings from the US military, 70 bombings each day.
Đây là vào tháng 2, đến tháng 5 1967 thì chúng tôi đi từ đấy vào trong Vĩnh Linh. Lúc đó bom Mỹ là bắn liên tục, chúng tôi đang chạy thì bỗng nhiên là anh lái xe đang đi về tối mò, xe của chúng tôi đi đâm vào một cái xe tải đang đậu ở trước để mà tránh bom. Xe của chúng tôi tan nát, riêng Marceline phải vào nhập viện ở trong quân y Hà Tĩnh. Lúc đó thì ông Ivan quyết định là để Marceline nằm lại điều trị tại đây, còn tất cả chúng ta tối nay chúng ta lên đường. Ở bờ Bắc chúng ta có một cái cột cờ cao là vào khoảng 134 mét. Máy bay Mỹ rất ghét cái lá cờ này cho đi qua lại thả bom, đi về lại thả bom. Event dặn thế này, Tuấn quay phim, đây là một biểu tượng quan trọng của phim. Lá cờ Việt Nam sẽ tung bay từ bờ Bắc ra bờ Nam, nói được cái ý nguyện thống nhất hai bờ của một đất nước. Tuấn bắt đầu quay phim 2 phút rồi 3 phút quay. Event bảo với tôi, bảo thằng Tuấn xuống ngay đi, được rồi. Tuấn lúc đó lại xua tay, bảo quay tiếp. Quay phim đã đến những lúc đó thì quên cái chết và bắt đầu lại quay phim tiếp. Tôi vừa mới nhìn thấy anh Tuấn quay phim thì bỗng nhiên máy bay nó ào đến. Tôi nghe một tiếng động rất mạnh, rồi khi mà tỉnh dậy thì thấy người ta đang kéo tôi lên. Thì ra trong lúc mà chúng tôi đang làm, máy bay nó thả bom xuống và một quả bom đã vùi tôi với ông Ivan xuống đất.
Máy bay đã bay xa, chuẩn bị tiếp tục làm việc.
To Joris Evans, not only the final product, but every detail and contribution of every member should be counted and well preserved.
Trong chuyến làm phim của chúng tôi á, những anh em đi thì rất nhiều người chết, thì trong đó có một anh tên là anh Khuê. Khi mà qua phà thì anh ấy bị bắn, người ta thấy anh chết thì anh nằm sấp xuống và anh ôm những cái phim vào lòng. Vài tháng sau chúng tôi xem những cái tư liệu ở viện tài liệu thời sự của anh Lê Huân thì thấy có một cái phim trên cái màn ảnh nó có loang lỗ nhân hình cái này, thì dưới Ivan vùng lên bảo trời ơi, đây là máu của Khuê. Ông Ivan nói với anh Lê Huân, anh gắng giữ gìn những cái thước phim này, những thước phim đã phải trả bằng máu của người chiến sĩ quay phim Việt Nam.
Inspired by the bravery of soldiers and especially Joris Evans, Xuân Phượng gave up her job as a doctor to become one of the first female war filmmakers of Vietnam.
Ông Joris Evans có nói lúc này tổ quốc của bạn đang cần những cái người làm phóng viên chiến trường, mà tôi thấy Phượng có một cái tố chất nào đấy có thể làm tốt. Sau 2 tháng ở Vĩnh Linh, thấy cái sức chiến đấu này, thấy cái sự hy sinh, sự cố gắng, sự mất mát và lòng can đảm của người dân Vĩnh Linh, tôi rất là cảm phục sâu sắc, và tôi nghĩ rằng làm được cái việc ghi lại những hình ảnh như thế là một điều rất cần thiết trong lúc đó. Tôi nghe lời của ông thầy tôi là ông Joris Evans, năm đó là tôi 37 tuổi và tôi trở lại làm một cái người phụ nữ và quay phim chiến trường. Đối với những người làm phim chiến tranh, màn ảnh có thể là một vũ khí và màn ảnh cũng có thể là chiến trường.
You mentioned a little bit about how the audience reacted in silence because they were just so much in awe of the footage that they saw. How else did the public and the audience respond to the films of Joris Evans on Vietnam?
So we know that Le Ciel à Terre, this first film, was got a good reception in Paris, and elsewhere it was bought by broadcasting companies around the world. And there were large queues in Paris to enter the cinema, but there were also right-wing actions against the films. There were bricks thrown through the windows of the cinemas. There were seats devastated because they were very much in favor of the Americans, in favor of the war. But of course, this large student movement, which had its pinnacle in May '68, with the revolution of the students in the streets of Paris, followed by a lot of other cities, a lot of demonstrations, quite violent, with killing in America on the campuses, and so it was a fierce struggle as well in the West. But in this movement, these films played an enormous role.
Yes.
The students who saw this film finally had their footage and their arguments to continue their own fight. And these students didn't want to only look at these films, they want to act. So they established all kinds of supportive groups. For instance, in his birthplace, Nijmegen,
Yes.
they made and bought bikes to send to Vietnam. And it even has an enormous cultural influence. They started all kinds of institutions. The alternative cinema in Nijmegen was created by the same student movement. It was political, it was cultural, it was economical, it was international.
Wow, the
So
film had a major value.
Yes, but also Joris himself, he was member of the group to support the people who try to find funding, to try to find money, to send film editing tables to the studios in Hanoi. So when he was here, he found out there were too little editing tables, too little film footage. And of course, Vietnam was supported by the East German film studios, by the Chinese and by the Russians. But anyway, they needed editing tables, so they constructed themselves in Amsterdam, in Nijmegen, their own editing tables to send to Vietnam.
Celebrating the 120th birthday of Joris Evans, the Vietnam Film Institute organized an international conference, Joris Evans and the Vietnam War, Looking Back in History for a Better Future, in Hanoi last November. The conference was opened with precious films by Joris Evans, capturing Vietnamese images during the fiercest struggle for the country's independence and freedom. The film's historic and artistic values truly touch viewers' hearts.
Ông chính là người đã khởi xướng cho một cái phong cách quay tài liệu là trực tiếp và thu âm trực tiếp. Phải nhớ rằng là những năm 60 thực hiện thu âm trực tiếp rất khó, máy móc cồng kềnh. Những cái thước phim mà ông đã quay đấy thì bây giờ đúng là sau bao nhiêu năm chúng ta quay lại chúng ta thấy rất cảm động. Nếu ông không ghi thì có lẽ cái thế hệ trẻ Việt Nam chúng ta không hình dung được.
Joris Evans conducted 4 documentaries on Vietnam. Notably, the 17th Parallel and the People's War was awarded with an International Lenin Peace Prize, not only promoting a brave Vietnam via priceless films to the war. Joris Evans' style of making documentary films have deeply influenced the leading generations of Vietnamese movie producers.
Đặc biệt, chúng tôi học nhiều ở cái phim Bầu Trời và Mặt Đất. Nó như là một nhịp thở của đất nước và dân tộc mình. Cuộc chiến tranh nó khẩn trương như thế nào? Từ cái cấy rất nhanh, vừa sản xuất vừa đeo súng, mà qua cái hành động đó thì mình biết rằng những người quay phim của chúng ta nếu không lao động thì mà chui xuống hầm thì làm sao mà có những hình ảnh ghi lên lịch sử ngày hôm nay được. Chúng tôi làm những thước phim trong chiến tranh là như thế cũng ảnh hưởng rất nhiều về cái cách suy nghĩ của ông Evans.
Sau khi tiếp nhận tác phẩm của Joris Evans tặng Viện Phim chúng tôi cũng đã tiến hành nghiên cứu và có cái kế hoạch để phổ biến cho mọi người hiểu thêm cái giá trị của tác phẩm của Joris Evans. Kỷ niệm của những nhà làm phim nghiên cứu rất là có ý nghĩa đối với cả các thế hệ trẻ bây giờ hiểu thêm về phong cách, về phương pháp làm phim tài liệu.
The conference in Vietnam, Joris Evans and the Vietnam War, Looking Back in History for a Better Future, with the participations of scholars, filmmakers and directors from the US, Canada and Hong Kong, China, Australia, Indonesia and Netherlands, is expected to contribute to popularize historic images of Vietnamese to today's generations as well as to the war.
L'oncle Laurent m'a expliqué les principes de la chasse au renard. Lorsque ces deux pattes derrière sont déjà prises dans un tract.
Now, your trip this time to Vietnam is to attend the International Symposium. Can you please tell us a little bit about why this symposium is being held this year and at this time?
Yes, it's at the occasion of the 120th birthday of Joris Evans on the 18th of November. And since 2.5 years, We do have a partnership with the Film Institute in Vietnam, and this partnership evolved through the ceremony last year. We transferred the films to the Film Institute, we transferred photos and the documents, there's everything related to Joris Evans, Marceline Loredan Evans in Vietnam. We gave to the Vietnamese because it's their history. Yeah. It's very important that you have this material. This ceremony was last October.
In his career of filmmaking, do you think that Joris Evans had kind of a special love, in a way, for what he filmed and what he made here in Vietnam?
That's true, without any doubt. Otherwise he wouldn't have come back and made 4 films. Maybe it's nice to...
Yes, please.
So we keep in this letter in the Joris Evans archive.
Yes.
And he wrote to his brother, his name is Hans. It was another trip.
Yes.
It was another country, it was another people. They were great, they were courageous, very brave, combative. They were very generous and very tender. So all these qualities of the Vietnamese. And he said, yes, it's possible. How is possible? Yes, it is possible. So he was very happy to finally get acquainted with the Vietnamese people and could tell his brother about these qualities.
Exactly.
And then he continues in Dutch, and I translate it in English. Here is much important work to do for filmmakers, you will understand. Yeah. With my experience, I can help to achieve a fast victory. It is as if the wind of history, this time not the Mistral, the wind in southern France, blew me towards here via Spain, China, Mali, Cuba. I'm landed here and I feel at home. He felt at home.
Yes.
That's the story. It's the first letter he wrote when he went here in June 1965.
Yes, that's beautiful.
Yours was a testimony of 5 wars, so it wasn't a new situation for him. He worked at the war front in the Spanish Civil War, during the Second World War, so he was experienced in war situation, and for him it wasn't a sacrifice. He never complained about anything. He had this mission, he had this goal to support the Vietnamese people.
And he would go on to continue his filmmaking career.
Yes, until he died at the age of 19, and still in his 89th year he made his final film, his Testament, in China, and he got 2 nearly death experiences. He was flown by a special airplane of Air France from Beijing to France to save his life. But for him, filmmaking was like breathing, and it was his life. It was his energy. As long as he could make films, he could continue to live.
President Ho Chi Minh held a very special position in many of Evans' films. I mean, as we said, it was late President Ho Chi Minh who gave him the permission to go into some of these areas. Tell us a little bit about kind of the interactions between Evans and the late president.
When you see the sequence, you feel immediately that there was a kind of a click between these 2 men. And of course Ho Chi Minh was educated also abroad and went abroad, and also to West European countries. So there was already a kind of link because of the background of Ho Chi Minh. And of course Ho Chi Minh was very intelligent and was also funny and easygoing in a way. So they had a kind of same qualities. And I think Joris admired both the personality, the character of Ho Chi Minh, but also the way he was capable of inspiring the Vietnamese people. The first film Joris made alone, but the second time, in '67, he came together with his wife, Marceline Loredan Evans, who was a very elegant, tiny woman with miniskirts, etc. So Ho Chi Minh was kind of shocked, I suppose, that this woman wanted to join Joris to enter the war scene in Finland.
La fabrication des pièges est une activité traditionnelle au Sud-Vietnam. Depuis toujours, les villages doivent se défendre contre les incursions des animaux sauvages. On a recensé 30 modèles différents de pièges à pic.
Le président Ho Chi Minh me disait, depuis 25 ans, le Vietnam tout entier est un piège. 2 armées de 500 000 hommes chacune s'y sont laissés prendre. Le corps expéditionnaire, puis la nouvelle armée mercenaire du Sud. L'oncle Ho m'a expliqué les principes de la chasse au renard. Lorsque ses 2 pattes derrière sont déjà prises dans un traquenard, le renard se débat comme les Américains dans le Sud. Il essaye de s'en tirer, il s'entête, et bat l'air de ses pattes avant et s'enfonce dans un nouveau piège.
Do you think the meetings with President Ho Chi Minh impacted Evans in a way and in his filmmaking as well?
I'm pretty convinced that he experienced this supportive idea of President Ho Chi Minh, that he was supported by the president, of course, made an enormous impact on the confidence both of the Vietnamese people, also as a film director, entering a strange land with another language. You're not accustomed with these people. When you get the support of the president, it feels more comfortable to do this, and also that you have a similar goal.
Exactly.
To convince the Western audience about this cause. It's of course a major impact, and you know that later on this film was made. Probably it's the final footage made by foreign filmmakers about this meeting of President Ho Chi Minh in the garden of the presidential palace, where he's talking about the battle in Can San.
Yes, Can San.
So this discussion with the soldiers. So this is the historical footage because it was the final footage of the president at that time.
Trung đội nữ đấy. Đây cô nói xem nào, bắn máy bay nữ bắn máy bay cái trận hạ máy bay như thế nào?
Báo cáo bác thì chúng cháu cũng là sản xuất, nhưng mà 3 năm chiến tranh thì ở như đảng ủy và nhận đội có tổ chức một lớp huấn luyện về từ cái hôm mà trực cho đến bữa hôm chiến thắng thì 11 ngày mà chúng cháu đã đánh 3 trận. Và lần đầu tiên bắt đầu ra thì ra ngày đầu tiên lại đánh trận đầu tiên, nên là lúc đấy cũng bỡ ngỡ.
Có sợ không?
Dạ, thưa bác là cái dòng bom nó cũng bỏ cách trận địa khoảng 100 mét thôi. Nhưng mà chúng cháu cũng chẳng sợ cái gì, nhưng mà nó cũng bắt đầu tiên thì nó cũng hồi hộp về súng. Cho nên là đến ngày bữa hôm đấy là mùng 6 tháng 6. Cái bữa hôm thứ hai là đánh trận thứ hai là ngày mùng 9 tháng 6. Mùng 9 tháng 6 là đánh trận thứ hai. Nhưng mà do kết quả cũng chưa được, chiến kỹ thuật của chúng cháu thì mới học có 5 ngày rưỡi, nên là ra trận địa cũng chưa có cái chiến kỹ thuật mấy, cho nên là chúng cháu lại phải tăng cường học thêm chiến kỹ thuật ngày đêm, rèn luyện thêm. Thế đến bữa hôm mà 3 giờ chiều ngày 16 thì hai chiếc nó lên nó đánh phá ở những cái vùng quê chúng cháu. Thì từ trận địa mà cách chỗ mục tiêu thì hơn 200 mét. Thế thì nó lên nó bổ nhào cắm vào trận địa chúng cháu. Chúng cháu bắt đầu phát hỏa và đánh thì trước đi đầu chúng cháu không đánh. Cái trước thứ hai thì chúng cháu bắt đầu phát hỏa thì 27 viên đạn thì hạ một máy bay A4D vào hôm 3 giờ chiều ngày 14 tháng 6.
Khi bắn đúng nó rơi xuống đấy mừng không?
Dạ, báo cáo với bác thì chúng cháu đánh xong đấy, nhưng mà nhìn qua quan sát và nhân dân họ trực tiếp lên dần điện mẫu và nó khoảng cách khoảng hơn 200 mét thì nó bốc cháy và nó từ từ lai ra biển. Vì chúng cháu ở ven biển đó.
Nó ra biển. Không chạy theo được. Thế trên lái máy bay.
Báo cáo với bác là nó xuống biển là chết mà cách từ Nẹ ra đấy 7 cây. Sau là dân cư gọi đi kéo chài, thế là thấy nước loang và đi kéo thì sáng bay lên.
What do the films that he has made in his entire career tell us about his philosophy and his aspirations in life?
I think that his message was lust for life. Just love the people around you and love to create a better world. And his commitment, I think that it is put your soul in it. Be a passionate artist, because art can make a better world. There's a beautiful quotation of the German philosopher Hegel, who said, art is indeed the first teacher of the people, and that's the way of approach of Joris Ivens. Art can play an enormous role in anybody's life.
Well, thank you very much, Andre.
It was a pleasure.
For sharing with us very in-depth stories about the life and the legacy of Joris Ivens, and we hope that this cooperation between the European Foundation Joris Ivens and the Vietnam Film Institute in particular, as well as the cooperation between our two countries, will continue to flourish in the future.
You're right. I'm hoping that's too.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure we will succeed.
Thank you very much for joining us. And that has wrapped up this edition of Talk Vietnam, as we've learned more about the film legacy of Joris Ivens, and especially the films that he made about Vietnam during its war days. We hope that you have enjoyed the footage you've seen here on today's show, and we'll see you more next time here on Talk Vietnam. Goodbye for now.